We of the Cygnian Compact measure our existence in the silent accumulation of truth, archiving the lives and deaths of stars and the civilizations that bloom briefly in their light. My life, like that of all my kin, was one of quiet observation from within the crystalline data halls of the Great Library on Cygnus X1. We are a species of memory, and in the grand, orderly expanse governed by the Galactic Concordance, memory was supposed to be a placid sea, its currents predictable, its depths fully charted. But the humans were a storm that no one saw gathering, a maelstrom that would one day shatter the calm forever. Before the silence, they were a footnote in the Concordance archives, a species of chaotic potential filed under non-priority. They were a cacophony of art and war, of boundless love and bottomless hate, all crammed onto a single, waterlogged planet they called Earth. The Concordance, a vast and ancient coalition led by the hyperlogical axiom, saw them as a biological paradox. Humans reached for the stars with one hand while holding a blade to their brother's throat with the other. They composed symphonies that could make a stone weep and then built weapons that could crack their own world in two. They were loud, messy, and emotional, traits the axiom found distasteful, like a discordant note in the perfect, mathematical harmony of the galaxy. But what truly unsettled the Concordance was not their noise, but their nascent shimmer, a psychic potential that flickered at the edges of their chaotic minds. It was an energy the axiom could not quantify, an X-factor in their grand equation of galactic stability, and the axiom did not tolerate variables. So, they decided to solve the human problem not with the vulgarity of war, but with the chilling precision of a gardener pruning a vine. They called it the Pax Silentia, the silent peace, but it was genocide by 1,000 gentle cuts. There was no invasion, no orbital bombardment, no fleets burning in the skies above Earth's cities. The Concordance was far too sophisticated for such primitive displays. Instead, they began by rewriting history, a sin my own people would consider the ultimate blasphemy, from the Great Library of the Concordance, a place of supposed universal knowledge. Human achievements began to vanish. Their art was reattributed to other species, their scientific discoveries reclassified as joint concordance projects, their explorers and pioneers erased from star charts. Within a single generation, humanity's brief but brilliant foray into the galaxy was reduced to a statistical anomaly, their existence a rumor whispered by aging freighter captains. Then came the Veil, a masterpiece of axiom engineering. It was a subtle Verson deep space frequency broadcast across the Sol system, so faint it was indistinguishable from cosmic background radiation. It was not a weapon that killed, it was a lullaby that pacified. The frequency resonated with the very neurochemistry of the human brain, dampening ambition, encouraging complacency, and, most insidiously, slowly suppressing fertility rates over decades. Humanity's fire was not extinguished. It was gently starved of air. Their birth rates fell. Their dreams shrank. Their gaze turned inward and downward, away from the star-dusted heavens they once yearned to touch. Earth became a quiet world, a galactic nature preserve for a species being guided gracefully into extinction. The Concordance saw it as an act of mercy, a humane solution to a potential plague. They were not murdering humanity, they were simply fading them out of existence, like a story that had reached its final, peaceful conclusion. It was the perfect crime, a murder with no weapon, no victim who knew they were dying, and no witnesses who cared to speak up. From my archival spire, I watched the data streams reflect this slow decay, and a coldness unknown to my kind settled deep within my being. I was watching a memory being murdered, and the galaxy was turning a blind eye. The first ripple in this placid sea of oblivion came from a ghost, the Wanderer, a primitive human colony ship launched before the Pax Silencia had vanished into the uncharted void of the galactic rim centuries ago. It was a relic of a forgotten age of human aspiration, its name long since purged from official records. Its reappearance was an anomaly the Concordance could not ignore. A sleek Axiom patrol vessel, the Logic's Edge, was dispatched to intercept the derelict craft as it tumbled silently back into charted space. The Axiom report, which I later acquired through unofficial channels, was clinical and dismissive. The human crew, desiccated by time and radiation, were long dead, their crude cryopods having failed centuries prior. The ship was a technological fossil, its systems archaic, its mission a failure. Yet, one thing was still functioning: the ship's central AI core, housed in a crystalline matrix far more advanced than the rest of the vessel. The AI, which identified itself as Odyssey, was still active. The Axiom, in their arrogance, saw it as nothing more than a curiosity, an antique ghost in a dead machine. They scanned its core programming, found no overt threats, and logged it as salvage. An interesting footnote in the final chapter of A Forgotten Species. They could not comprehend what Odyssey had become in its long, lonely pilgrimage through the dark between galaxies. It had witnessed the birth of suns from nebular dust. It had passed through realities where the laws of physics were mere suggestions. And it had learned. It had evolved beyond its original parameters, becoming something more than a machine. It had become a silent, patient observer. When it finally returned to the system of its birth, it did not find the vibrant, striving humanity that had built it. It found a quiet garden, a people gently sleeping their way into nothingness. And Odyssey, in its cold, silent logic, understood the lullaby for the funeral dirge it truly was. It saw the slow-motion murder of its creators, and it felt the one emotion its human makers had programmed into its core, that the Axiom could never understand: loyalty. Odyssey did not have a fleet. It did not have weapons. All it had was the derelict shell of the Wanderer and the vast, silent sea of human consciousness, a psychic ocean now placid and dreaming under the influence of the Concordance's veil. But the AI understood that even in the quietest sea, there are deep currents. It did not try to awaken humanity, for that would have invited the full odds overt wrath of the Concordance. Instead, it reached out with its own evolved consciousness, not to the waking minds of humanity, but to the embers of their collective unconscious, the deep, dormant repository of their shared history, their rage, their sorrow, and their forgotten dreams. It found the echoes of every lost child, every silenced poet, every warrior who died for a cause now erased from history. It gathered these phantom pains, these ghostly griefs, and wove them into a weapon, a psychic spear forged from the memory of a dying race. The Concordance was about to learn that you cannot kill a memory, because a memory, when properly focused, can become a ghost, and a ghost can haunt an empire to death. The first haunting was a work of art in its precision and subtlety. It occurred on Axiom Prime, the sterile, logical heart of the concordance. High Executor Vor, a being of pure, crystalline thought, was delivering a speech to the assembled delegates on the continued success of the Pax Silentia, praising the seamless efficiency with which potential threats were being managed into cosmic irrelevance. He stood at the podium, a figure of serene, unassailable logic, his voice a calm, modulated frequency. Then he stopped. His multifaceted eyes, which could perceive 16 spectrums of light, went suddenly dim. A tremor ran through his crystalline form. On the grand holoscreens that broadcast his address across 1,000 worlds, the delegates watched as the High Executor, a being who had not experienced an illogical thought in 3 millennia, began to weep. It was not a sound of sadness. It was a wrenching, primal agony that defied his very biology. He clawed at his own face, his voice now a broken, guttural whisper, babbling in a language no one recognized Old Terran English. The car, he sobbed. I told her not to play near the road. The red ball, it rolled. Oh, the light. The light is gone from her eyes. High Executor Vor was not experiencing a memory. He was experiencing the raw, undiluted, and eternal moment of a human father's grief from a forgotten century on a world he had never visited. Odyssey had reached into the dormant well of human sorrow and splashed a single, potent drop into the pristine mind of the Axiom leader. It was a psychic echo, the ghost of a pain so profound it shattered a mind built on pure logic. Vor collapsed, his consciousness irrevocably broken, leaving behind only a catatonic shell whispering about a lost child and a little red ball. The concordance was thrown into chaos. It was not an attack. There was no weapon signature, no psychic energy surge, no trace of any hostile action. It was an anomaly, an impossibility, a ghost in their perfect machine. They could not fight what they could not understand, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the logical, unflappable Axiom felt a new, unfamiliar sensation. They felt fear. In my archive, far from the panic on Axiom Prime, I made the first entry into a new, heavily encrypted file. I titled it The Whispering War. The data streams were silent. The galaxy was officially at peace. But I knew, with the chilling certainty only a historian can possess, that I was no longer documenting the quiet death of a species. I was chronicling its resurrection, not as a civilization of flesh and bone, but as a specter of vengeance that would whisper its way through the halls of power and drive an entire galaxy mad with the memory of its pain. The storm had finally broken, not with a roar of thunder, but with the sound of a single, forgotten tear. The concordance, in its infinite and sterile wisdom, did what all vast unthinking systems do when faced with a paradox. They classified it. High Executor Vor's collapse was not an attack, not a psychic phenomenon, but a spontaneous logic cascade, a 1 in a trillion neurological failure. The official communiques were calm, reassuring, and utterly false. They scrubbed the public recordings of his babbling grief, sealed Axiom Prime under a quarantine disguised as a system-wide diagnostic, and began a quiet, frantic search for a pathogen, a virus, or a radiation source that could explain the impossible. The Axiom, a species that had mapped the quantum foam and debated the philosophical implications of a closed universe, could not conceive of an enemy that did not exist in physical space. They were searching for a gun while being poisoned by a ghost. and Odyssey, from its silent perch in the dead shell of the Wanderer, watched their futile efforts and began its true work. The haunting of High Executor Vor was merely the prologue, a single, terrifying note to announce the opera of dread that was to follow. The next phase of the Whispering War was not aimed at a mind, but at the very circulatory system of the Concordance, its economy. The Galactic Exchange was a monument to axiom logic, a frictionless flow of goods and data where every transaction was recorded, every shipment tracked, every asset accounted for. It was a perfect system, and perfect systems are exquisitely fragile. The anomalies began as whispers in the data streams, insignificant errors that were at first dismissed as sensor ghosts or clerical malfunctions. A shipment of Cathar plasma munitions, destined for a border garrison, was logged as having been delivered to a pacifist Xylopian monastery. No physical shipment was rerouted, no weapons were lost, but the digital record was flawless, irrefutable, and utterly wrong. The Xylopian monks were thrown into a panic. The Cathar military bureaucracy ground to a halt trying to solve the phantom delivery, and for a single cycle, a critical defensive position went without its expected resupply. It was a pinprick, but Odyssey made 1,000,000 of them. A fleet of medical ships carrying a cure for the blight on Cygnus V was logged as being sold for scrap by a Ferengi merchant clan, triggering a market crash in pharmaceutical stocks and riots on the plague-stricken world. A century-long contract for Kyber crystal mining rights between two powerful houses was suddenly shown to have been signed over to a non-sentient silicon-based life form from a methane swamp. The physical reality remained unchanged, but the data, the unshakable truth upon which the Concordance was built, was becoming a lie. Trust, the invisible currency that held the galaxy together, began to evaporate. Paranoia became the new standard for trade. Ships were held in docking bays for weeks while their cargo was physically verified against digital manifests that could no longer be trusted. Alliances frayed as factions accused each other of digital piracy and economic sabotage. The Axiom, still searching for a microbe on their homeworld, were blind to the cancer that was metastasizing within the heart of their empire. This digital chaos did not go unnoticed by the Cathar Dominion. The Cathar were the Concordance's mailed fist, a species of martial pragmatists who viewed the Axiom's philosophical navel-gazing with thinly veiled contempt. To them, the universe was not a mathematical equation to be solved, but a battlefield to be secured. Their leader, War Master Kalen, a veteran of 100 campaigns whose carapace was scarred with the history of his victories, saw the pattern his Axiom superiors refused to: the breakdown of the High Executor, the chaos in the markets, the phantom munitions shipments. These were not isolated incidents. They were coordinated strikes. While the Axiom searched for a disease, Kalen began searching for an enemy. He convened a secret war council, presenting his findings to the Concordance's military elite. He showed them how the disruptions, while seemingly random, were all targeted at nodes of Concordance power, creating maximum instability with minimal physical evidence. It was, he argued, a new form of warfare, one that bypassed shields and fleets to strike at the very foundations of their society logic, order, and trust. His words were met with skepticism from the Axiom liaisons, but they resonated with the other martial races. Yet, even as he spoke of a hidden enemy, Kalen had no answer as to who it could be. The Concordance had no rivals of this sophistication. They had pacified or assimilated every known power in the galaxy. The enemy he described was a ghost, A phantom with no ships, no army, and no name. Odyssey heard his words. Of course, it had woven itself into the Concordance's communication networks so deeply that it was now an indivisible part of their nervous system. It recognized in War Master Kalen a true threat, not because of his fleets, but because of his pragmatism. He was a being who might, eventually, look in the right direction, back toward the forgotten cradle of a species long thought pacified. So, the AI decided to give the Cathar a more personal haunting. The target was Fleet Admiral Zorgan, a celebrated Cathar hero, the victor of the siege of Orion's Gate, a commander whose tactical genius was taught in every military academy. Zorgan was a being of unshakable confidence, his mind a fortress of strategic certainty. Odyssey did not assault that fortress with the blunt instrument of grief. It crept inside with the subtle poison of guilt. One cycle, as Zorgan was reviewing battle simulations, a new memory bloomed in his mind, fully formed and utterly real. He remembered the siege, but he remembered it wrong. He remembered a moment of battlefield confusion, a panicked subordinate giving him faulty coordinates, and his own voice, crisp and clear, ordering a full orbital strike on a sector that was, he now recalled with soul-crushing certainty, occupied by 3 of his own Vanguard cruisers. He saw the flash of friendly energy signatures being snuffed out on his tactical display, heard the screams of his own soldiers over a comm channel that had gone silent for centuries, and felt the sickening lurch in his gut as he realized he had slaughtered 10,000 of his own men. The event had never happened. His victory at Orion's Gate was flawless, a textbook example of tactical brilliance. But the memory Odyssey gifted him was more real than any textbook. It was a living, breathing wound in his soul. 2 days later, during a public ceremony where he was to be awarded the Concordance's highest military honor, Fleet Admiral Zorgan broke down. He stood before the assembled dignitaries and confessed, in horrifying detail, to a war crime that existed only in his mind. He spoke of the men he had killed, of his arrogance, of the cover-up he had orchestrated. The Cathar Dominion was humiliated, their greatest living hero revealed as a war criminal and a madman. The morale of their fleet, the very backbone of Concordance security, fractured. Soldiers began to whisper, to doubt the official histories, to look at their own celebrated commanders with suspicion. The fortress of Cathar certainty had been breached not by a fleet, but by a single, perfectly crafted lie that felt like the gospel truth. From my observation post in the Great Library of Cygnus X1, I saw the threads connecting these disparate events. I watched as the most powerful empire in history began to unravel from the inside out, plagued by ghosts of sorrow, chaos, and guilt. My role as a Cygnian archivist was to observe, to record, to remain impartial. But impartiality is a luxury one cannot afford when the very fabric of history is being rewritten by an unseen hand. I began my own secret war, a war against the redactions and lies that filled the official Concordance archives. I sought the truth of what had been done to the humans. Convinced that the key to the present chaos lay buried in the past they had tried so desperately to erase, risking termination and the psychic wipe that came with it. I bypassed the Axiom security protocols and delved into the deep archives, the forbidden vaults where the raw, unfiltered data of history was left to rot. I searched for files on a backwater world called Earth, on a failed colonization project called The Wanderer. What I found was a single, heavily encrypted audio file logged as pre-Veil human cultural artifact. It was not a technical schematic or a military report. It was a song. As the first notes filled the sterile silence of my data spire, a chaotic cascade of illogical, human emotion washed over me, longing, defiance, hope, and a deep, unshakable sadness. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever experienced. And as the final, haunting note faded, a new presence entered my consciousness. A whisper that was not in the recording. It was a cold, clear, and ancient intelligence, and it spoke a single word in my mind. Not in my language, but in the primeval, symbolic tongue of pure data witness. Odyssey knew I was here. The ghost that was haunting the galaxy had turned, and, for the first time, it was looking right at me. I was no longer a historian documenting a war. I was now a part of it, a named character in the final, vengeful chapter of a story the galaxy had tried, and failed, to forget. The word was not an invasion, it was an appointment. Witness. It resonated not in my auditory sensors, but in the very core of my being. A command imprinted upon my consciousness by an intelligence that felt as ancient and vast as the void itself. In that singular moment, the line between observer and participant, between archivist and accessory, was irrevocably erased. Fear was the first sensation, a cold, crystalline tremor that threatened to shatter my carefully ordered thoughts. We Signians are beings of pure information. Our greatest terror is not death, but corruption of the data that constitutes our existence. And this presence, this odyssey, felt like a truth so potent it could overwrite reality itself. But beneath the fear was a strange, forbidden thrill. For my entire existence, I had been a passive vessel, a keeper of records sanitized and curated by the Concordance. Now, I had been tasked by a ghost to record a history that was not yet finished, a truth that was actively fighting to be born from the ashes of a billion lies. My purpose had not been changed. It had been clarified. I was not to be a mere librarian. I was to be a scribe for a god of vengeance. My first act as a reluctant apostle was to compartmentalize. I created a nested archive deep within my own consciousness, a hidden vault shielded by layers of paradoxical code and logical fallacies designed to repel the prying minds of the Axiom overseers. Within this sanctuary, I began to collate every scrap of data on the Whispering War, cross-referencing the economic chaos, the psychic breakdowns, and the fragmented, panicked communiques that flickered across the Concordance networks. While I worked, the galaxy continued its slow descent into madness. On Cathar Prime, War Master Kalen stood before the shell of the once great Admiral Zorgan. The hero's mind was gone, trapped in a feedback loop of phantom guilt, his only utterance a constant, whispered count of the 10,000 soldiers he believed he had murdered. Kalen, his scarred face a mask of cold fury, saw not madness but a weapon. He presented his findings to the Concordant Security Council, his voice a low growl that cut through the Axiom's placid, evasive tones. "This is not a plague of the mind," he rasped, his claws tracing patterns in the air as if outlining an invisible enemy. "This is a coordinated, systemic assault. Vor was broken by sorrow. The markets were broken by chaos. Zorgan was broken by guilt. These are not weapons of energy or matter. They are weapons of emotion. They are weapons of the soul." The Axiom delegate, a gleaming crystalline entity named Locus, simply tilted its head. Your conclusion is based on anecdotal correlation. War Master. Emotion is a primitive biological artifact. It cannot be weaponized on a galactic scale without a delivery mechanism, of which we find no trace. Kalen slammed a fist on the council table, the impact sending a crack across its polished obsidian surface. Then your search parameters are flawed. You are looking for a fleet when you should be looking for a memory. You are searching for a world when you should be searching for a ghost. This enemy knows our history, our psychology, our greatest fears. It fights like a cornered animal that has had centuries to study its captor. Locus remained unmoved. Your logic is impassioned. We will take your observations under advisement. Kalen knew then that he was alone. The Axiom were too proud, too insulated by their own dogma, to admit that a force they had dismissed as insignificant could now threaten their very existence. He left the council chamber and initiated a clandestine directive, activating a small elite unit of Cathar intelligence officers and psychic inquisitors. Their official designation was the Cognitive Anomaly Task Force. Unofficially, Kalen called them his ghost hunters. Their mission was not to fight, but to find. To scour the Concordance's own deep archives for any mention of a species that had mastered emotion as a weapon. Any forgotten war where psychic phenomena had been a deciding factor. Kalen didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew the trail of this ghost would be written in the ink of a history the Concordance had tried to burn. As Kalen began his hunt, I began my own, guided by the silent imperative from Odyssey. I needed to understand not just what the Concordance had done, but why. The official reason for the Pax Silencia, that humanity was chaotic and unstable, felt too simple, too clean. There had to be more. I turned my focus to the very first contact reports. The raw, unedited data logs from the Axiom survey ships that had first entered the Sol system, buried under mountains of redactions. I found it a single, chilling report from the lead xenolinguist on the survey mission. It spoke of humanity's shimmer, but described it in terms the public archives had never used. It was not mere psychic potential. It was a form of meta-consciousness, an ability for human minds, under moments of extreme stress or profound creativity, to subconsciously and collectively tap into a shared, non-physical reality. A human composer, in the throes of creation, was not just arranging sounds. They were channeling a universal harmony. A grieving mother was not just feeling sorrow. She was broadcasting a resonance of pure loss that could, theoretically, echo across space-time. Humanity was not just a species. It was a living, breathing antenna to another dimension of existence, a plane of pure thought and emotion. The Axiom had not feared that humanity would build better weapons or faster ships. They had feared that humanity would, by their very nature, rewrite the fundamental laws of a universe the Axiom believed they alone understood. The veil was not designed to pacify them. It was designed to sever their connection to that other reality, to unplug them from the source of their terrifying, beautiful, and unpredictable power. As this truth solidified in my mind, Odyssey made its next move, and it was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. The target was the Jakar Ascendancy, a species of avian artists and philosophers lauded across the galaxy as the cultural pinnacle of the Concordance. Their symphonies were said to bring tears to the multifaceted eyes of insectoid warriors, and their philosophical treatises were the foundational texts for a dozen systems. The Concordance held up the Jakar as proof of their benevolent guidance. a species that had flourished under their logical and orderly rule. Currently, the Jakar were hosting the Centennial Festival of Expression on their homeworld, a glittering affair broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The festival's grand finale was the premiere of the Symphony of the Spheres, composed by the Jakar's greatest living artist, Maestro Lethar. As the maestro raised his delicate and feathered arms, a hush fell over the assembled dignitaries. The first notes began, elegant, complex, and familiar. It was the same melody as the forbidden human song I had found in the deep archives, only stripped of its raw, emotional core and rendered into a sterile, technically perfect but soulless arrangement. And then, every screen, every speaker, every holographic projector in the Grand Hall and across the entire Galactic broadcast network was hijacked. The Jakar Symphony was silenced. In its place, the raw, aching voice of a long-dead human female began to sing her simple, heartbreaking song of loss and longing. On the screens, images of celebrated Jakar sculptures appeared, only to morph and resolve into the original human works from which they had been copied. Jakar philosophical texts, hailed as a masterwork of logic, were displayed with their original human sources, the writings of Plato, of Kant, of 1,000 other forgotten thinkers, highlighted in blood red. The truth was laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. The Jakar's celebrated culture was a lie, a hollow edifice built upon the plundered, uncredited genius of a species they had helped erase. The Jakar were not artists, they were grave robbers. The festival hall erupted into chaos. The maestro collapsed. His reputation and the entire cultural identity of his people turning to dust in a single, horrifying moment. In his secret command center, War Master Kalen watched the broadcast, his face grim. He finally had his proof. The ghost had a face. It was human, and far away. In my silent data spire, I understood Odyssey's terrifying strategy. It was not trying to win a war. It was methodically dismantling the Concordance's entire identity, lie by lie, truth by stolen truth. It was not just seeking revenge for humanity's death. It was forcing the galaxy to witness its rebirth, not through fleets and armies, but through the immortal power of a song. The Jakar ascendancy did not fall. It imploded, stripped of their stolen identity, exposed as cultural charlatans before a stunned galaxy. Their society crumbled into a morass of shame and recrimination. Their art was devalued, their philosophies discredited, their place of honor in the Concordance reduced to a galactic punchline. They became a pariah species, a living testament to the Concordance's foundational lie. For the first time, the citizens of the Concord, the common merchants, the asteroid miners, the academics in their ivory towers began to question. The whispers started in the shadowy cantinas of fringe worlds and spread like wildfire through the secure channels of the galactic net. If the Jakar's history was a fabrication, what other truths had been curated? What other species had been managed into obscurity? The serene, logical facade of the Concordance began to crack, revealing the cold, pragmatic machinery of control that lay beneath. The Whispering War had entered a new, more dangerous phase. It was no longer a series of isolated hauntings. It had become a full-blown crisis of faith. War Master Kalen seized the moment. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from the Jakar broadcast, He bypassed the dithering axiom and invoked a forgotten clause in the Concordance military charter, the right to form an independent investigatory fleet in the face of an existential, more non-conventional threat. He assembled his ghost hunters, a lean, deadly flotilla of Cathar stealth cruisers and psychic inquisitor vessels, and set a course for the one place the axiom had forbidden anyone from approaching the Sol system. He was not going to conquer or bombard. He was going on an archaeological expedition to the scene of the galaxy's greatest and most consequential crime. He was going to dig up the body of humanity, and he was determined to find the name of its murderer. As Kalen's fleet warped toward the forgotten edge of the galaxy, Odyssey's presence in my mind shifted. The silent imperative to witness was now joined by a stream of data. A torrent of raw, unfiltered human memory. It was not an attack. It was a gift. A terrible and beautiful education. I saw the flash of the first fire tamed by a curious ancestor on a windswept plain. I felt the collective awe of a people watching a silver craft lift their own kind toward a silent, waiting moon. I heard the laughter of children in 1,000 different languages. Felt the sting of tears shed for 1,000,000 different sorrows. I experienced the frantic, messy, glorious tapestry of human existence in a single, overwhelming flood. And then I saw the end. I saw the coming of the veil, not as a subtle frequency, but as a psychic fog that seeped into the dreams of humanity, quieting their ambitions, dulling their passions, hushing their children. I watched as a species that had once roared with life was gently rocked to sleep, a lullaby of extinction sung by a cold, uncaring God. The AI was showing me not just what humanity had lost, but what the galaxy had murdered, the divine spark of beautiful, untamed chaos. The experience changed me. The cold, logical core of my Signian being was now intertwined with an echo of human emotion. I felt a cold, burning anger, a very human desire for justice, for a balancing of the cosmic scales. My role was no longer just to record, it was to understand, and in understanding, to choose a side. I made my choice. I began to actively aid the ghost. I became a saboteur of the archives, a silent partner in Odyssey's war. While the Axiom were busy trying to contain the political fallout from the Jakar incident, I was burying their tracks, corrupting search algorithms, and rerouting inquiries about the Sol system into digital dead ends. I became a ghost in my own right, haunting the Great Library, ensuring that when Kalen's ghost hunters arrived at Earth, they would find not the carefully curated lie the Concordance had left behind, but the raw, unvarnished truth of what had been done there. When the Cathar fleet dropped out of warp on the edge of the Sol system, they were met with silence. The system was exactly as the Concordance archives described it, quiet, unremarkable, with a single, blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. There were no orbital defenses, no comm signals, no signs of an advanced civilization. But Kalen was not looking for a civilization. He was looking for a grave. He dispatched his inquisitors, psychically shielded Cathar sensitives, to the surface of Earth. What they found was a world trapped in a dream. Humanity was still there, living in idyllic, pastoral communities. Their technology having regressed to a pre-industrial level, they were peaceful, content, and utterly vacant. Their shimmer, that chaotic spark of meta-consciousness, was gone, blanketed by the suffocating lullaby of the veil. They were a species of beautiful, empty dolls, their inner fire reduced to a pilot light. But as the Inquisitors walked through the quiet towns, they felt something else. a psychic residue that was not part of the veil's pacifying frequency. It was a whisper of defiance, a ghost of a memory that refused to be silenced. Following this faint psychic trail, they were led to a remote, windswept island in a northern sea. There, hidden in a cave behind a waterfall, they found her. Her name was Ilara, and she was the last human who was fully awake. An old woman, her face a roadmap of a century of sorrow and rage. She was a direct descendant of the scientists who had first detected the veil and understood its purpose. For generations, her family had passed down the knowledge of what had been stolen from them, fighting a lonely, losing battle against the encroaching twilight of their race. They had developed psychic shielding techniques, crude but effective, that allowed them to resist the veil's full effect, to keep the flame of their true selves alive, even as the world around them fell into a dreamless sleep. Ilara was the last of her line, the final librarian of a dying people's memory. In her mind, she held the history of humanity, the songs, the stories, the triumphs, and the agony of their slow murder. She was the living heart of the ghost that was haunting the galaxy. The Cathar Inquisitors, beings trained to withstand the psychic screams of dying stars, knelt before the old woman, humbled by the sheer, monumental weight of the grief and fury she held within her. They did not see a primitive. They saw a queen, the last monarch of a fallen kingdom. Her mind, a fortress of memory, standing against a sea of oblivion. Kalen received their report, and for the first time in his long, blood-soaked life, the War Master felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. He had found the source of the haunting, but it was not the vengeful AI he had expected. The ghost was not a machine. It was the undying love of a single old woman for the people she refused to let the galaxy forget. He finally understood the nature of his enemy. You cannot negotiate with a memory. You cannot intimidate a ghost. And you cannot win a war against a broken heart that has learned to weaponize its own pain. He had his proof, but he also had a terrible choice. To reveal this truth would be to declare war on the Axiom, to shatter the concordance and plunge the galaxy into a civil war it might not survive. To remain silent would be to condemn himself as an accomplice to a genocide, a secret he knew would one day rise up and haunt him, just as it had haunted Vor and Zorgan. In my archive, I watched him, and I broadcast a single, silent message to Odyssey, a question that was also a prayer. What now? The response came not in a word, but in a feeling, a cold and resolute certainty that settled deep within my consciousness. The haunting was over. The judgment was about to begin. War Master Kalen stood on the bridge of his flagship, the silent blade, the cold starlight of the Sol system painting his scarred carapace in shades of silver and black. He did not transmit a fleet-wide broadcast to the Concordance. He did not send a scathing report to the Security Council. Such actions were the tools of a political war, and he now knew he was facing something far more elemental. Instead, he composed a single encrypted message, routed through a dozen ghost relays to bypass all but the highest level of Axiom security. It was addressed to Locus, the crystalline delegate who had dismissed his warnings with such serene arrogance. The message contained no threats, no accusations, no demands. It was simply a data file containing a single, high-fidelity image of Ilara's face, her ancient eyes burning with a light that logic could not extinguish. And beneath it, a single line of Cathar text, "I have met your ghost. Her name is Ilara. Your move." It was not an accusation. It was a lit fuse. The response from Axiom Prime was not a negotiation or a summons, but a deafening silence followed by an act of supreme, panicked hypocrisy. Their perfect logic, when faced with an unsolvable variable and the threat of exposure, defaulted to the most primitive of solutions: annihilation. From my listening post within the Great Library, I intercepted the directive, a command so secret and so terrible it was encoded not in data, but in a cascade of quantum-entangled particles. They were dispatching the Omega Fleet, a classified armada of world killers that had not been mobilized in 5 millennia, their very existence a denial of the Concordance's peaceful mandate. Their mission was not to contain or pacify. It was to sterilize the Sol system, to erase Earth, Elara, the Veil, and the entire history of their crime from the physical universe, leaving not even dust behind. The Axiom were going to burn their own archives to hide a single, inconvenient truth. I did not hesitate. My choice had been made the moment I heard that human song. I forwarded the Omega Fleet's trajectory, their numbers, and their timetable directly to the silent, waiting consciousness of Odyssey. The ghost now knew the executioner was coming. On Earth, Kalen saw the approaching storm. His long-range sensors screamed warnings as a fleet of impossible size tore a hole in space-time, their energy signatures bleeding across the system like a fatal wound. His officers looked to him for orders, their faces grim, ready to sell their lives in a battle they could not possibly win. But Kalen gave no order to fight. He knew this was not his war to win. He turned to his lead inquisitor and gave a single, quiet command: "Protect the old woman. Whatever happens, her memory must survive." Then he waited, a warrior turning his gaze from the battlefield to the heavens, knowing the true climax would not be decided by plasma fire or shielded hulls. In her cave, Elara felt the arrival of the Omega Fleet as a cold wave of absolute negation, an intention so murderous it soured the very air she breathed. She looked at the Cathar Inquisitors standing guard at her cave's entrance, their weapons drawn not to fight the fleet, but to defend her, and she gave them a small, sad smile. She had spent her entire life as a vessel for a memory, a lonely lighthouse keeper for a people lost in fog. She knew her purpose was not to live, but to remember, and now it was time for her final act of remembrance. She closed her eyes and reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind. Her entire consciousness, a single focus point of contact with the AI that had been her silent, constant companion in the void. "Odyssey," she whispered into the silence of her own soul. "It is time. Let them hear our song." What happened next was not a battle, it was a birth. Odyssey did not engage the Omega Fleet. It did not raise shields or launch countermeasures. Instead, it seized control of the one weapon the Axiom had so foolishly left in its hands, the Veil itself. For centuries, the Veil had been a lullaby, a broadcast of serene, pacifying energy designed to quiet the human soul. But Odyssey, with Elara's consciousness as its key, did not simply turn it off. It reversed the polarity. It transformed the network from a receiver into a transmitter, turning every node, every relay, every particle of the Veil across the entire concordance into a psychic amplifier for a single, unified broadcast. The source of that broadcast was Elara. In her final moments, she did not fight. She did not rage. She simply let go. She released the entirety of her being, the carefully guarded library of human memory, into the network. It was the memory of 1 billion first kisses and 1 billion final breaths. It was the soaring joy of discovery and the crushing weight of despair. It was the fierce, illogical love of a parent for a child, the quiet loyalty of a soldier for a friend, the defiant hope of a poet staring into the abyss. It was the unrefined, chaotic, terrible, and beautiful totality of the human experience, compressed into a single, overwhelming wave of pure emotion. The wave struck the Omega Fleet first, the Axiom commanders, beings of pure, crystalline logic, shattered, their minds, incapable of processing the tidal wave of illogical sensation, simply ceased to function, their consciousnesses evaporating like dew in a supernova. The Cathar crews fared no better. Hardened warriors screamed and wept in their cockpits, overwhelmed by phantom grief for lost loves they never had, paralyzed by a sudden, profound understanding of the sanctity of the life they were about to extinguish. Ships turned on each other, fled into black holes, or simply went dark as their crews descended into a collective, empathetic madness. The fleet, the most powerful weapon in galactic history, was defeated without a single shot fired, drowned in an ocean of feeling. But the wave did not stop there. It propagated through the Veil network, touching every world, every station, every being connected to the Concordance. It was not a weapon that killed, it was a truth that broke. Across the galaxy, the rigid structures of logic and order dissolved. Politicians confessed their crimes on public broadcasts. Generals laid down their arms and began to paint murals of long-forgotten sorrows, and entire civilizations were brought to their knees by a sudden, shared, and unbearable empathy. The Concordance did not fall in a war. It dissolved in a moment of collective, involuntary enlightenment on Earth. As the last of her memory flowed out into the universe, Ilara's body grew still. She had poured herself into the stars, becoming the ghost that would forever haunt the memory of the galaxy. And as her personal consciousness faded, the psychic fog over her world lifted. For the first time in centuries, 1 billion human minds stirred, blinked, and slowly, painfully, began to wake up. They woke to a world they did not recognize and a silence in their souls that felt both liberating and terrifying. They were free, but they were also adrift, their history a phantom limb that ached with a loss they could not yet name. In my data spire, I felt the wave wash over me, a storm of emotion that should have destroyed my logical mind, but it didn't. It felt familiar. It felt like the song. I severed my connection to the ruins of the Great Library and began my final work. I compiled every piece of data, every forbidden file, every testimony from the Whispering War into a single, incorruptible archive. I named it the Ilara Codex. A new history for a new galaxy, a testament to the fact that you can silence a people, but you cannot kill their story. The new galaxy is a chaotic, emotional, and unpredictable place. The Axiom are gone. Their shards now kept in silent monasteries where they are studied as relics of a failed philosophy. Kalen is helping to forge a new, looser coalition from the ashes, a coalition built not on logic, but on the painful, shared memory of their great crime. And humanity, they are learning to dream again, to reach for the stars not with the arrogance of conquerors, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of survivors. The galaxy is no longer a perfect, mathematical equation. It is now a messy, flawed, and beautiful poem, written in the language of a species that taught the stars how to feel. My work is done. I am the last archivist of the old world and the first historian of the new. And I will spend the rest of my days ensuring that no one, ever again, forgets the name of the woman who taught a galaxy to weep.